Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bear Down Ballers here on the Field of 68 Media Network. I'm Ryan Wall, joined as always by Jordan Pollock. And Jordan, this past weekend, the Arizona Wildcats won their fourth straight game. They moved to 8-5 on the season, 2-0 in Big 12 play. And guess what? They finally beat their first ranked opponent of the season. They beat the 16th ranked Cincinnati Bearcats 72 to 67 on the road. They escaped after giving away a big lead that they had in the second half. We'll get into all that in a little bit. First off, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. I'm excited, and I think what we've seen has been really a lot of at least improvement going into conference play now that they've played some, I think, a little bit higher competitive teams and went into some good environments. I think the Cincinnati game they played really well. I was impressed. I was impressed. I think the 19-point lead that they let slip away, I think that was a little nerve-wracking towards the end, and they weren't playing really good basketball at all, but they held on. And I think at the end of the day, like they say it, I feel like in every sport, like an ugly win is better than a good loss. And I felt like that's kind of the biggest thing that I got from this game, at least like when you look back at the second half.
Yeah, they say in sports all the time, in playoffs especially, but survive in
Mhm.
advance. And they certainly did that. I kind of had mixed feelings. It was great that they pulled out the win on one hand. That was incredible. But what stood out to me the most was what you said. They blew a 19-point lead. Cincinnati went on a 28 to 12 run in that second half. And Arizona, yeah, they really just let Cincinnati get going. They let that crowd get involved. Dan Skillings was excellent in this game, 18 points. Dylan Mitchell he had 13.7 rebounds, but his defense, that guy had two steals, but that also didn't tell the whole story. He was just so aggressive, was forcing turnovers. And when you press Arizona, Arizona just they never seem to get out of the press well, and Cincinnati did a good job of exposing that.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was the biggest. I said to you before we started recording this, it's a weird type of victory because Cincinnati was coming off of a loss earlier in the week to Kansas State, so they were ranked 16th, but they were coming off of a loss, and then they come into this game, and Arizona was winning by they were winning by 13 points at the half, up to almost 20 points, and then they just couldn't hit a shot to save their life. Caleb Love, 3 for 15 from the field. Jaden Bradley led the team in scoring with 15. He was good in this one. Very good job by him. But for the Arizona side, Jordan, there's one guy that stood out to me the most. Although he didn't lead the team in scoring, he had his best game as a collegiate athlete, and that was Carter Bryant. That was the five-star freshman, the top 25 guy. This was the game that people expected from Carter Bryant when Arizona recruited him. This is what NBA scouts are looking forward to when they're scouting him for this up and coming year's NBA draft. He was excellent from 3 point range, 3 for 3, 14 points, 4 rebounds, added in a block. He was just so aggressive. And when he gets in that rhythm with his jump shot, it just seems like he can't miss. He has such a smooth jumper. Was really impressed by him in this game, especially on the road for Arizona. This guy was just amazing in this one, and only 15 minutes on the court. What'd you think of Carter Bryant?
Yeah, I completely agree. Like being perfect from the floor as a freshman is extremely hard to do, especially when you're playing high level basketball and you're not even starting. And so for him to kind of come off the bench and to be able to add this kind of production is really good. And I think probably the only thing that held him a little bit out of even some of the minutes that he was on was his four personal fouls, one shy away from fouling
Yep.
out. But I thought he did. I thought he did very well in this game, and I thought it was kind of one of his big coming out games, especially shooting because I know you've talked about his shot and how you like it, but it just hasn't been falling, and it looked really good on Saturday against Cincinnati.
Yeah, it did. And when he's hitting shots like that, he is not just a good freshman, but he's a very important, impactful player for Tommy Lloyd, this team. Because without him, if he didn't have a game like that, Arizona loses that game. He hit a couple big shots late in that game. He was playing in crunch time some minutes because, like I said, Caleb Love, this has been the story about Caleb Love. He said he came off a 32-point game. He had in the past 5, 6 games, he had multiple 20-point plus games. He was starting to find his rhythm and then right back down, 3 for 15, 2 for 8 from three. And when Caleb Love isn't hitting shots early, it's really a tell for how the rest of the game is going to go because when he's not hitting shots early, he kind of loses confidence a little bit. And then that's when Arizona's in trouble because Caleb Love, he shot 15 shots in this game. Jaden Bradley was second with 9, and then you have Trey Townsend with 7. So no one else is that willing of a shooter. So if Caleb Love's not hitting the shots, especially down the stretch, that's why Arizona hasn't won a lot of these games in
Yeah.
crunch time because Caleb Love hasn't been on in crunch time at all during this season in these close games, and no one else has stepped up. What else did you take away from this game in this first game that they've won on the road in conference play?
Yeah, I think to piggyback off of like the struggle of another Caleb Love kind of infuriating game when he starts off not shooting well. I took a pretty big positive out of that though, because lately the teams that they've beaten, it's kind of almost been because it's okay, Caleb's now back. He's the scorer, he's scoring 20 points a game. So now that's a guy we can depend on to where this is pretty much one of the very only games they've played this year where he has not had to do and handle a majority of all the scoring and they squeezed out a win. So I think that's a super important part because great teams can win in multiple ways. And and that's I think a thing that I
Mm.
really thought that this team was going to bring coming into the year. We haven't seen that so far. And so I think that's one of the positives I got specifically from this game is just
Yeah.
the ability to win in different ways.
Yeah, and also adding on that, great teams have other players and have guys that you may not think like a Carter Bryant off the bench that contributes at a high level and has a great game. And
Mm-hmm.
also, people forget, and that's the thing with Caleb Love. He's such a polarizing player as being a preseason All-American in college basketball. Everybody likes to talk about him and likes to get down on him when he's having bad games, but let's be real. Caleb Love averaged 18 points, was a career high in college last year for Arizona. But that does not mean he's going to score. He can't score 20 points every night. He had 23, 24, and 33 the previous 3 games. And I didn't hear much, a lot of talk about his great play in those games. So, yeah, it's very easy to pile on when he has a bad performance, and obviously this one was against the ranked team, so it's going to get a little bit more publicity. But Caleb Love in the last month has shown strides, has bounced back from bad games, and he still found a way to finish with 12 points when earlier in the season he had 3 games under 10 points. So he is still finding a way to impact the game, made 4 foul shots, and also had 6 rebounds. So I still think he's growing and he's figuring out a way to affect the game in more ways than scoring. So I think that that's good, and I also think it's good that other players like a Bradley, like a Bryant, and Lewis and Visar both had over 8 points. It's other guys are contributing, and that's what this team needs to take a little bit of the burden off Love late in games because he can't have that pressure on him every single night.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think to your point, I think that's the reason why we play an NCAA bracket. And then we also have a John Wooden Player of the Year award. Like just because your team has that player doesn't mean you're going to win the national championship. Like with Zach Edey, Frank Kaminsky, Frank Mason, like great players are not the fix it all. They're not going to play every single minute of your game. I mean, I'm sure we've seen sometimes that's happened, but that's the thing. But the better teams are going to win and beat the team at times that has the best player. And so I think that's something as we're going along and we're seeing like, okay, there's going to be nights where Caleb Love is the best player on the court, and that's going to help us. And then there's going to be nights where he is, but he's not playing like it. So who else is going to come up and step up? And so
Mhm.
one guy that you talked about, you thought his best game. I thought a guy that from his position, I thought the best game that he's had so far in his career was Henry Vasar, leading the team with 8 rebounds, 8 points, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 4 assists. That's a heck of a stat line for a second year guy that still feels like is still at times trying to figure out his role and still trying to figure out what he can do and just had some mean power forward moves in that game Saturday. I know he had 2 huge dunks off of a rebound that he got
Mhm.
late in the shot clock and another one just off of a big post step in for a dunk. I've loved what I've seen him, especially these last 2 games, and I think he can do nothing but help this team going forward with the lack of with the lack of availability that it seems they have in the front court now with Mo Privas still hurt. And he's slowly starting to take these minutes away from Toby Awaka too. He almost doubled up his minutes.
Yeah, so yeah, we've seen that with not just him, but we've also seen that with KJ Lewis. Those two guys both played 26 minutes, and that's more than three of the starters.
Yep.
Awaka had 14, Townsend 24, and Delurso 20. So it seems like it doesn't matter who's starting, it matters who gets the most minutes. And
Mm-hmm.
Vasar, I agree. I was really impressed with him. I like the physicality he's playing with down low, as you mentioned. And I think it's only a matter of time, actually, that Tommy inserts him in the starting lineup. I think he's earned it. He's been pretty consistent here, affecting the game in so many different ways. And yeah, we haven't seen him a ton start, and so I think that would be a good change of pace and kind of just a different look with that starting group. But is there anything else that stood out to you in this win over Cincinnati?
I thought just one very specific thing that you talked about. I think when Cincinnati applied some of the pressure, I think one thing to note was a lot of those pressures were happening on the sideline to where I know KJ Lewis and Caleb Love had pretty bad turnovers that left to transition dunks that were trying to get the ball back to the middle. And so I know that's usually where they have Henry Vasar and Toby Awaka almost as an outlet and also setting up ball screens to the wings. So I think that is an interesting thing that I'm sure a lot of teams will pick up film wise. And I know they're not the only ones that do that, but I just think that's an interesting thing, especially with the athleticism of a lot of the front court in this conference and how um, their center had some crazy and their power forward had some crazy plays off of those steals. So I think that's one interesting thing that I took away and to look forward.
Yeah, I also found that same thing. KJ Lewis did lead the team with three turnovers. Although he scored 9 points, I wasn't very impressed with him. I think he played a very sloppy game. I think his shot making and inside the paint was just wasn't great. I didn't like his decision making. I think he needs to be better. And also, this is something that I just had a thought while watching him and. I kind of he has taken a step forward on offense this season. Obviously, last season he averaged 6 points. This year he's almost at 10 points. That's a big jump, even as is as a second year player. But I just still don't feel like his offensive game is developed enough to be a big like I coming into the season, I thought it was going to be like Caleb Love and him. I thought he was going to like break out where he could average 12 plus and he could go off for 15 or more. And I just think it's kind of stagnant his production. And I don't really think the ceiling this season, at least, hopefully he can come back for another year or two. I don't think it's his ceiling on offense is that high because he doesn't he in this game, for example, he shot no 3 pointers. He only shot 6 shots, which he doesn't shoot a lot in general. And I really think when that's the case, he's just not affecting the game on a high level on offense as a scorer and enough as a scorer to be one of your best players.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like we've seen flashes of some of his offensive ability. Like I feel like he's one of the guys that I've seen where I've always loved his 3-point shot. And but we've only seen flashes of him hitting it. And I don't even feel like I've seen him register a made three in a few games here. But I agree with you, and I think I'm curious if almost he's kind of curious if maybe his offensive like ability should be determined almost in transition. And then when that's not there, if he kind of wants to take a step back
Yeah.
in this sense and kind of let the offense flow rather than him try to flow into the offense, if that makes sense. Which anybody that's played basketball to a certain high level, yes, if you're like in this kind of offense, you will get looks, but then there's also times where sometimes you can have can kind of like force some specific looks. So it's interesting and and I agree with you and at times I feel like it's kind of determined based on his aggressiveness,
Yeah,
if
that
that
was a
makes
great point.
sense.
Yeah, it was a great point that you made about transition and his looks in transition. You can't, I've always thought this about players. Even if you do score well in transition, you can't rely on that because those buckets are sporadic and they
Hmm.
come here and there. And yeah, you just can't rely on them.
Definitely.
And another thing is Arizona. Cincinnati shot 25 3-pointers, Arizona 14. Arizona was 35%, not horrible, but this team just really struggle. It seems like a yearly theme since Tommy Lloyd's been the coach. They just don't shoot a lot of 3-pointers. They don't have a lot of good 3-point shooters on this team. If you just look at it, Caleb Love shot 8 3-pointers. If you take Caleb Love out, you have Townsend who shot one, Del Orso shot two, and Bryant shot three. So you have three players besides Love who took eight, who took more than half of the 3-pointers that attempted a three. And you just can't have that. You need some of these guys like a Del Orso, who even though he was 0 for 2, you need him to start to keep shooting. And Townsend, I had crazy expectations for him from three after he made a couple in an exhibition game or two earlier in the season,
Yep.
and
I remember.
he just barely attempts them. And Jaden Bradley, he's another guy where I expected him to develop that shot a little bit more, and he's not willing to shoot at all from deep. Do you think the before we wrap up on this game and move on, do you think this is a problem with Arizona not getting a ton of production from 3-point land?
I think it depends on who it is. Like I always saw Anthony Del Orso, and maybe it's
As a
just
team, as a
yeah,
team.
yeah. I'm kind of curious your thoughts because I think almost it kind of sounds like a anti-analytics perspective in a sense. But I also know like college basketball is very different than the NBA, and we see some teams very much take an NBA kind of perspective. Like Alabama is the main team that like they're shooting layups or they're shooting threes, they're not shooting twos. And I still think the college game is so diverse where I don't think you need to necessarily do that. And especially, I think in this game, I don't really felt like Cincinnati was really hunting threes until the second half when they were trying to get back in it. Like I don't like they only made 5 of 25, and I would be surprised if they made more than one in the first half. It felt like all of those were kind of some of them were definitely desperations. I know they made one literally as time expired, and some of those were just kind of trying to get back into the game.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say I don't probably go so much on the side of like I don't think it's a huge issue, mostly because I think there's just so few teams to where like they live and die by the 3-pointer. You know what I mean? Like Alabama,
Yeah.
Creighton's another one of those teams that
Yeah,
felt
no,
like
I'm not
Phil.
saying no, I
Yeah,
agree with that 100%. I don't think it's successful in the long term to live and die by the three by no means. I'm just saying when you look at this team, there's nights like this where there's just nobody even attempting threes really and nobody you don't have a guy who can even you don't have like a reliable guy on this whole team that can consistently hit threes. Carter Bryant
yeah,
went 3 for 3 who has struggled from three this season
yep,
and he made over half of the threes. So all I'm saying is if this team's going to go deep and going to try to make a run and they have done a great job of getting back on track as we've continued to hope the last couple of weeks. I think to take the next step, they're going to have to be willing to shoot more threes. And some of the guys that haven't are going to have to try to figure a couple of things out. But overall, Jordan, I think we agree. It was great to get a win over a ranked team for Arizona. They're moving in the right direction. They're not that far away from at this point getting back into the top 25, as crazy as it may have sounded a couple of weeks ago. But now they play the West Virginia Mountaineers, a rematch of the third place game back at the Battle for Atlantis in November 29th. Arizona lost that game 83 to 76, and they lost that game in overtime. But in that one, Tucker DeVries went off for 26 points, 8 3-pointers. He's been out for a long time at this point, over a month about, and his timetable is kind of up in the air. It doesn't seem like he's going to play in this one. Arizona's 2.5 point favorites. This game's taking place at 7 on the East Coast, 5 p.m. in Arizona time. So what do you think about this matchup? What do you think about Arizona trying to get revenge on their loss just over a month ago against West Virginia?
Yeah, I think like you said, especially with Tucker DeVries, definitely going to be a very different kind of game. Especially in that Battle for Atlantis game, it felt like half the offense kind of ran through him. And I know he's had a really great career going back to even when he was with his dad back at Drake. And Darian DeVries has done a great job, I think, in his first year with West Virginia. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, I think this game's going to be quite a bit different, especially without him, just because of how big of a threat he is scoring wise from the 3 point line, and even inside. The dude's a big guy, so I actually think it'll be a little bit low scoring. The over unders at 144.5 for this game, according to ESPN bets, and I think it probably goes into the 70s, probably.
Yeah, the last time these two team plays, it wasn't just Tucker DeVries who went off. Toby Akonyi dropped 20 points. Javon Small had 14 points, and Javon Small also went off for 24 in their last game against Oklahoma State. They beat them by 19 on Saturday, but their big win was last Tuesday. They beat number 7 Kansas on the road by 1 point, and so that was just unbelievable for this Mountaineers team. Right now, they're ranked 21 in the country. So Arizona, they're a favorite, and they could get their second win on the road in Big 12 play, but also their second win over a ranked team. So
Mhm.
this is a big stretch for Arizona. This is, to me, a big, not almost a make or break game, but kind of a game to see where they're at. If they can win this game, that means I'm starting to turn my wheels in my head of thinking this team could be legit, could make a run at the Big 12 even if they can get this win. Jordan, let's get to your prediction though. What do you think's going to happen? You had Arizona losing against Cincinnati. Arizona won that game. What do you think about this one against West Virginia on the road?
Yeah, I think especially in light of their two previous wins, I do think that Tucker DeVries matchup was just so difficult for Arizona, especially at the time. They just couldn't really consistently, it felt like, do anything well, play offense or play defense. So I think without him, I think I'm a little bit higher on Arizona in this game, and I think Arizona's going to get a close win. I'd say probably 77 to 75. I think it'll still stay within a possession or two. Morgantown's a tough place to play. I personally probably would consider West Virginia a basketball school, especially with the huge history of Huggins there and how great of a coach he was. But I think it'll be a great game. It'll probably be, yeah, it'll be their. I think the environment would probably going to be a little bit better. I hope students are getting closer to being on campus. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think Arizona is going to come out with a win in this one. And on top of that, so far I mentioned it a few episodes ago. Arizona in their non-throwback uniforms are 2-0 in Big 12 play. So I'm going to be looking at the uniforms. I don't know about y'all, but that's one thing I'm going to keep an eye on too.
Yeah, that's interesting to say the least as well. I actually thought that West Virginia, before they played Cincinnati, before Arizona played Cincinnati, I thought the West Virginia could be a tough spot for them, but I gained a lot of confidence with this Arizona team on the road, getting a win in the mud in a tough game where the momentum shifted in a big way to Cincinnati late in that game. I'm gonna go with Arizona to win this game to cover. I think they win it by about 4 to 5 points. Still a very close game. If Tucker DeVries plays, which is still unknown at this moment in time, it's a whole different game. I think Arizona could struggle to win that game, but we don't know that right now. I'm going with Arizona to move to 9-5 and 3-0 in the Big 12 would be a huge deal. But
Mhm.
Arizona, after West Virginia, they return home for 2 games against UCF, a game against Baylor on Saturday and Tuesday. That's their schedule. Saturday and Tuesday, they play the next 3 weeks. So we'll get you an episode early next week. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in to today's episode of Bear Down Ballers. I'm Ryan Wall. He's Jordan Pollock. Thanks for joining us.